All right, 7th grade. So yesterday you guys played a little game, a little Kahoots game called Is It Living or Non-Living or Was Once Living and Is Now Dead? So your game looked kind of like this. This is, of course, with my teacher set up. And then you guys filled out a survey that just kind of asks you guys a few questions about what you guys think it takes for an organism to be considered living or a thing to be considered living. Okay, a lot of you guys had some really good answers, and we'll talk about those here in a second. And a lot of you guys had some really good answers, but ones that weren't exactly correct. So probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I read about yesterday through your survey is that something that is living can move. Okay, but we know there's definitely examples of things that can't move, like a tree. Or like coral. Okay, so those were things that you guys saw throughout this video. I saw a lot of people, one of the other more popular comments on there was that it eats, or that it needs oxygen, or that it has to drink water. Well, we're going to kind of summarize those things. Some things actually don't need oxygen as well and would die in the presence of oxygen. So there's bacteria out there that if they're exposed to oxygen, they die. So we can't exactly qualify them as, you know, something that's living. There's other things that don't eat. So any plant, with the exception of like Venus flytraps, which obviously that's not their main way to get food is by eating flies, but those are all examples of organisms that make their own food, so they don't need to eat at all. So that's another big conception, is that a living organism needs to eat. Okay, so what you guys had on Teams today was a picture that looked like this, okay? And you guys were to add that to your notebook. So if you guys open your OneNote, you guys would need to add it to our first unit, which is life. It's what we're talking about right now. And on the 7 characteristics of life page. If you guys haven't set up your notebook earlier, you need to go back and do that. It was from the Tuesday after Labor Day. And if you guys just haven't plugged in your picture, go ahead and pause this video, copy and paste that picture, and add it to your 7 characteristics of life page. Okay, so let's just go through these really quick. So basically, if we are looking at an object or a thing and we want to see if it's living or not, it has to meet all 7 of these characteristics. If one of these characteristics do not fit the bill for this organism or this thing, it is not living. Okay, so the first one is consumes for energy and metabolism. So this is kind of referencing back where a lot of people put, hey, it needs water or it needs to eat. Well, like I said, not everything eats, but it does have a way of getting energy and going through metabolism. We're going to learn a little bit more about energy and metabolism here in about 2 units. But metabolism is basically our way of taking different things like sugar molecules and turning them into energy through a process called metabolism. Okay, so an organism has to do that. The second it stops doing that, it's no longer living. Okay, can grow and develop is our second criteria. So it has to have the ability to grow and develop. Okay, can reproduce, it needs to be able to pass its genetics on to its offspring, which if we want to look at genetics, we can go ahead and switch right down to 5, has genetic material. So DNA, RNA, a lot of bacteria have different things like RNA. We are more familiar with DNA, and most living organisms that we think of as living have DNA. Okay, so they can reproduce and pass down their genetic material. It's made of cells, so it might only be made of one cell, like a bacteria or some protists, or it can be made of millions and millions of cells like you and I. Okay. Number 6, respond to external and internal environment. So, for instance, if you guys touch a hot stove, this is an external environment. You guys are touching it on the outside of your body, and you respond to it. It hurts. You pull it away. You pull your hand away. Okay, or if you're looking at a sunflower, if you guys have ever noticed the flower on a sunflower, the head of it faces the sun. So you guys can see it responding to its external environment. When we talk about internal environment, that could be something as simple as maintaining our certain body temperature. So as human beings, we want a body temperature of 98.6 degrees Celsius. If we get too cold, what do? We shiver. right? That makes our muscles get going and helps warm our body up. You guys all know when you make your muscles work, you get hot. So if you go for a run, your muscles are working. It heats your body up. Okay, so that is why we shiver, is to get our muscles kind of flexing so we can raise our body temperature, our internal body temperature. Okay, if we get too hot, okay, and we need to pull our body temperature back down to 98.6 degrees, we sweat. Okay, sweating helps cool you down. It's the same reason you guys go swimming in the summer, is that water on your skin helps cool you down. So sweat has the purpose of helping cool you down so we can maintain the correct internal body temperature. So if you are a living thing, you can respond to external things to an extent, and you can respond to internal things. Okay, you can adapt and evolve. As you guys are experiencing, as long as you have DNA and your cells are replicating, you're experiencing changes all the time in your DNA. Okay, that helps you be more suited for your environment. It doesn't necessarily mean, I think a lot of kids hear the word evolve and they think, oh, we came from monkeys. And whether or not you guys agree with that, that's way past what we're talking about when we talk about evolve. So we can talk about relationships that we have with other organisms. Like, for instance, we're more closely related to a pig than we are a tree. Okay, that's kind of part of our evolution. Okay, and then can adapt. That's a big one. We see that all the time in nature, is organisms having a changing environment. For instance, if you guys look at a certain population of moth, they used to blend in beautifully with the white trees, the aspen trees that were in their environment. But then once the industrial age came along and pollution became a thing, the trees' bark started to change color, and those little moths were like snacks to birds until they started to have DNA changes that caused their wings to be a little bit darker and blend a little bit better with those trees. So those are peppered moths, and we'll do a little activity later in the year with peppered moths, so we can adapt to our environment. So anytime we don't meet one of these criteria or lose the ability to go through with one of these criteria, we're either not living or was once living and now is dead. So if we look back at that Kahoot game, obviously you guys should have all gotten this one right. A rock is not living, it's just made of minerals. Okay, the Rock. Okay, did you guys know that he looks a lot like Dwayne Johnson? That's because it is. Okay, and he's still living as far as we know. He's not just a myth, he is an actual man and a legend. Bears, so this kind of represents all bears. They are living. Okay, they meet all the 7 of those criteria. They're capable of reproducing, they have DNA, they're made of cells, etc. Sloths, while they look like they're not living, sure are living. The sloth, if you guys have ever seen the Goonies, this one's a tough one. I'm going to go and say this guy's still living. I don't know if the actor itself is still alive, but from what I know, I like to think that he's going to live forever. Okay? Bacteria. Bacteria most certainly are living. They are made of a cell. They don't need to be made of more than one cell. They all have DNA. Sometimes they have RNA, so that's why we call it genetic material. They can reproduce, all of those things, all of those criteria. A sponge. So sponge is actually a type of underwater or sea plant. And when that plant dies, we can harvest the sponge and use it to wash our bodies in the bathtub. So it was once living, but not anymore. So is now dead. So basically it met all 7 of those criteria, but then at some point it no longer had the ability to maintain one of those criteria, so is now dead. Okay? Coral. Coral is in fact a living thing. Okay, you wouldn't think it because it seems like it's just made of really hard material, but it is actually a living organism. A mushroom is a living organism. Cork. So cork actually comes from the bark of a cork tree. So you guys can see the cork tree right below. So it was once living and is now dead. And then obviously a cork tree is living, as it is a tree. An amoeba, these are really awesome if you guys have ever gotten the chance to look at pond water under a microscope. You guys can see these little amoebas floating around in there. They're really awesome when they eat because they just kind of engulf what they're eating. And that's pretty fun to watch. An apple tree, of course, you guys know that's living. But what about an apple picked off of that tree? Okay, if you look back at those 7 criteria, it does a little bit of metabolism post being picked, but only for so long. Mainly, it loses the ability to grow and develop because it's no longer attached to the tree. It can't do those things, okay? It can still reproduce if we plant its seed. It's still made of cells, still has genetic material, can't really respond to its environment once it's picked from the tree. And because it still can reproduce, it still has the ability to adapt and evolve as a species, not necessarily that single apple, okay? Back to the cahoots. Water. A lot of kids will say there is some living organisms in water, but the water itself is just H2O molecules. So it is non-living. Okay, soil, again, same thing. Kids will say there are living things in there, but for the most part, soil is broken down rock. So that's going to be non-living. A cell, we all know, is if an organism has to be made up of cells to be living, then a single cell itself should also be a living organism. And we know bacteria are single cells, so that is living. A fossil, this is a good one. A lot of kids got this wrong, okay? The thing that actually fossilizes is the shell, okay? The shell is just kind of like a rock. It's got minerals, but the thing inside has decayed and left and is no longer left as a fossil. So the shell itself was non-living. And that's why you guys would have marked non-living on the Kahoot, but the organism that lived inside would have definitely been living. It's just not remaining after thousands and thousands of years. And the hot topic of news nowadays is a virus, so you guys could look at something like coronavirus with this. This one's up for some debate, and there are a few viruses that they have proven now are living, but for the most part, the vast majority of viruses are considered non-living because they cannot do one thing on this list. They can consume things for energy and metabolism, they grow and develop, they can reproduce, but not on their own. Okay, so this one is the reason why a virus is not considered living, is it has to actually inject its DNA into another organism's cells, and those cells use its machinery to reproduce, and then it basically kills the cell and spits out a bunch more virus that can go and attack other cells. So that's usually how a virus works. Like I said, there's a very rare few number of viruses that they've found can do it on their own, but for the most part, a virus has to have a host. Okay, it has to have another organism to inject its DNA into and make it reproduce. Okay, so that's why we don't consider a virus a living thing. So that was kind of a trick question for you guys. All right, so if you haven't already, make sure that these 7 criteria are in your notebooks under the section Life, 7 Characteristics of Life page. And let me know if you guys have any questions. From now on, everything we're going to talk about is going to be a living organism. So we don't have to worry about things not meeting those 7 criteria. If we talk about them in class, they meet one of those 7 criteria. I hope you guys are having a good day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.